Yeah. Well, I think it certainly is accelerating. We saw pre-pandemic, the budget was 4.8 trillion, and now it's up to 6.4 trillion or something like that. And so that new level has been baked in.
Yep.
At the debt ceiling debate, they did not want to knock that down at all. And as a matter of fact, to your point, the CBO is just projected to get higher. I saw that the U.S. government spending is now greater than 25% of U.S. GDP.
Yeah.
So that fiscal spending makes up more than a quarter, which is past where we were in the 2008 great financial crash. And we're not even in any type of economic downturn. Like, this is like wartime deficits, and we haven't even seen a recession yet.
Right. And remember, there's state and local and county and all the rest of it. You put all that together, it's about 10 trillion. So it's over 40%. It's almost half of what we produce gets taken by the government. And you're exactly right. That's during peacetime, and we are absolutely running wartime style deficits. Our deficit numbers look like what they were at the absolute worst of 2008. So the concern there is that if we get a recession coming on the pike here, last time around we had I think it was 2 or 3 trillion in 2008. It was 2 trillion in 2008, and it was 3 trillion in 2020. Every time you have a recession, the deficit absolutely explodes, because on the one hand, you have a lot of people who need help. They lost their jobs, or they're having some other distress. So social spending soars, but then on the other hand, tax revenue dries up because nobody's making any money. So every single time, it gets bigger and bigger. So we're looking at probably, if I had to guess, another 2 trillion plus on the deficit when the recession finally hits. And, the other issue, I think, is one of the most exciting things about recessions is that every single time the left comes up with some new innovation that's going to permanently grow the government. And I think they sort of ran it on a trial basis during COVID. They are, I think, hell-bent on installing a UBI, a universal basic income. And I think it's very possible because of that this next recession could blow 2008 out of the water. It can even blow 2020 out of the water in terms of how much spending is ramped up, because I think they're going to go all in on a UBI. That will give them the bread to go with the circus, where they can, essentially pay millions of voters to sit on the couch and give all the rest to them.
Well, I think there's no question. There always is, but I think it's, in my view, overwhelming probability that this next recession is going to blow way past what we saw in the pandemic. But fiscal and monetary was about $11 trillion. Will probably be 15, 20, in the next one, because the holes get bigger, they have to fill them up. But back to the point that you said, talking about the UBI, universal basic income, don't we already have that? We already have housing, we already have food, we already have don't we already have UBI? In a sense, it's not called that, but we certainly have it.
Yeah, for sure. Certainly in terms of how much money it costs, probably in terms of how much it disincentivizes work and just sort of, making the correct choices in life. Designing a welfare program that only gives single mothers money if they kick the man out of the house. What could possibly go wrong? What could possibly happen to a community subjected to such a rule? So they're really wrong-headed. And, in terms of money, absolutely, we already have a UBI. And this, if we look at COVID, for example, they just laid it right on top. They didn't repeal anything whatsoever. The pitch that you'll often hear out of Washington from sort of the Mitt Romney types, the quote-unquote centrists, is they'll actually push UBIs because they say, no, we're going to take the current inefficient welfare system and we're going to replace that with this real simple one that's just no questions asked. And, we can cut the paperwork and, it's a lot more rational and all this. And we've actually been there. We already got baited and switched on that one. That was the EITC back in, I want to say the 70s or the 80s. The EITC, the Earned Income Tax Credit, that was sold as a negative income tax, and that was precisely the pitch. So again, we're going to replace this ridiculous welfare system that breaks up families and puts people in poverty traps. We're going to replace that with this system now where you got to go get a job. If you make $1,000, then you get another $450 in taxes. It's a clever idea. It was Milton Friedman came up with it. From an economics perspective, it's a very clever idea. From a political perspective, it's absolutely idiotic because they didn't repeal a darn thing. So right, that's the pitch that the centrist Republicans are going to come in with. The Democrats are going to try to bring them on board. The Democrats just want to buy votes. The centrist Republicans, I guess, want to get cushy jobs when they leave Congress, courtesy of their friends on the left. Either way, that's kind of the unholy coalition that is forever victimizing us. But anyway, they're going to be at it. The Democrats don't listen to me. Some of the centrists I can sort of intimidate. So I'm definitely going to be going after for them because I'm certain that's exactly the game that they're going to pull.
Yeah. Now, when you look at the need for this UBI, et cetera, I mean, we kind of have, like I was talking about earlier on an earlier segment of my show, just like the tale of two markets almost, or two economies and two markets really, where you have in the economy specifically, we have really, really good signs, so strong earnings and strong revenues and strong consumer spending. But then we see dwindling savings and massive amounts of debt.
Yeah.
Right, we're starting to see delinquencies piling up on credit cards, auto loans, et cetera. And the markets are the same, where the equity markets look really, really good, but the treasury markets, the bond markets are telling us trouble's coming. So we see these tell of two things. But I'm curious, we see that we have this massive amount of rising debt, both on the federal level. They've added about $1 trillion in the last month or so, but also on the consumer level. And not just consumer level, but also, corporate level as well. And while it seems like most eyes are on the federal debt, the government debt, which is obviously exploding, right? I said $1 trillion last month. The reality is that they don't default because they have the money printer.
Right.
It seems to me that the bigger problem is really in the private debt, and that's the sector that's probably going to blow up first, and they don't have a money printer to back that up. I'm curious on your thought on that.
They rent their money printer to lobbyists. So, yeah, depending on the industry, they do have a money printer. But we plebes definitely do not have a money printer. So we are on our own. We have to beg for our scraps and our UBIs. I think definitely the private debt is an issue. Currently, it's not biting as hard as you'd expect, really for two reasons. One of them is that during the pandemic, there was a huge amount, about $3 trillion of excess savings. So they handed out all this money, and people who were poor kind of used it up real fast, but a lot of the middle class saved it up. I suspect your stimmy checks were saved. Mine certainly were. And so that's been running down. And so the Fed now estimates that is going to run out in another month or two. And then the other reason why it hasn't bitten quite as hard as you'd expect is that a lot of those debts were incurred in absolutely historic lows in interest rates, right? So a lot of people are still driving cars where they've got 0% loans on them, or mortgages where, they cost 3%. So just because the rates come up, that doesn't hit all at once, right? You sort of have this gradual, person by person, their old debt is done, maybe it's paid off, and now they're coming for new debt. So the problem builds gradually, and that's part of the reason why there's typically about an 18-month delay between when the Fed hikes rates and when the economy actually hits. Companies have old cheap debt, households have old cheap debt, and so that's going to get run through gradually. And where we are on that timeline, the Fed started raising, I think, a little over a year ago, from roughly zero, but rates didn't really hit a restrictive level, meaning the rates that we saw before 2008 or before 2001. Pretty much before every recession, you get higher rates. In fact, that's what causes the recession. But anyway, we didn't hit those restrictive rates until like 3 or 4 months ago. So we're still very far away from when you would expect the recession to hit in full force. And, that's why a lot of the debate right now is you've got the cheerleaders saying, no, this is Goldilocks. My God, Sully landed the plane on the Hudson. Jay Powell is amazing. We're going to have the soft land. It is way too early to take victory laps. And in fact, given that it's so early, right, that we've only really had restrictive rates for a couple months, the fact that we're seeing bank collapses and, we're seeing a lot of statistics like bankruptcies, layoffs, mass layoffs. We're seeing a lot of statistics that are 2008 level, and we are way early in the rate hikes to be seeing that. So that's why I think when the recession comes, I think it's going to be pretty brutal.